Welcome to Viking Legacy and Lore. The episode you're about to hear will give you a deeper understanding of the legends and lore of the Viking Age and carry your imagination straight into their world. Before we dive in, I want to say thank you. I'm giving away a copy of the Sagas of the Icelanders to one listener as a way to say thank you. All you have to do is send an email to vikinglegacyandlore@gmail.com. Do that before July 4th to enter. The winner will be announced during the following episode. And now, the episode you've been waiting for.
Viking axes and shields weren't just about force. They were about strategy, design, and legacy. Most people picture crude tools, big, brutal axes, simple round shields, and chaotic raiders setting everything on fire. But here's the twist. These weapons were masterworks, crafted for precision, for teamwork, and symbolic power. This episode doesn't just list tools. It takes you inside the battlefield, where iron, wood, and flame work together like a deadly symphony, reshaping Europe and etching Viking names in history. You came here curious about axes, shields, and fire. What you'll leave with is not just what they were, but how they worked and why they turned small Viking bands into legendary war machines. His shoulders bore the quiet thickness of a man who had shaped steel more than once and would shape it again. His hands, broad and scarred, looked like they belonged to the earth itself, steady, unyielding, patient. He pulled his cloak tighter as his eyes swept the distant tree line. 2 ridge lines, 1 choke point. We keep everything in front of us, he muttered almost to himself. They will charge where we want them. His eyes still distant. He was seeing the battle before it happened. The movement of the enemy and the strategic position of the man at his side. Bjorn, shaking stray straw from his boots, smirked. Are you sure they're that stupid? They have to know attacking uphill with nowhere to go isn't going to end well for them. Ulf, deadpan, crossed his arms. These villagers and so-called warriors are too comfortable. The land has made them soft, and those who have armor are overconfident. Confident in their steel, but blind to the truth that no metal can shield a man from his own arrogance. The three exchanged a look, knowing that their plan would bring victory. They drifted toward the fire near their tents. 2 fresh logs added to the few embers still pulsing low and red. Gunnar inhaled the deepest breath you could imagine, and with one long, steady blow, the fire roared back to life. It's colder than a frost giant's backside, Bjorn muttered, sitting beside him. I'm curious how you know anything about a frost giant's backside, Gunnar grumbled, chuckling while imagining the scene and taking a seat. Bjorn grinned. I've never met one. I just figured it'd have to be close to what I see every time I'm stuck rowing behind you. Wolf snorted and laughed as he fed another scrap of bark into the fire. They settled into the kind of ease, practice, quiet that only comes after years of fighting beside the same men. The flickering light caught the edges of the old scars, calloused hands, and worn boots. Bjorn broke the silence first, voice softer now. I planted barley before we left. He stared into the flames like he could see the fields in them. Hoping to bring in a big harvest this year. Maybe build a house, find a good woman, fill it with children, you know? He chuckled under his breath. A lot of children, a whole mob of them, enough to drive a man mad and happy at the same time. Ulf leaned back, tossing a twig into the fire. 3 is enough for me. If I have any more, I'll send them your way. Although I can say it's nice when they start helping out around the farm. My one boy brought home the biggest reindeer with the most massive crown of antlers you've ever seen. I'm looking forward to some of that meat when we get back. Once those 3 boys are on their own, I'm going to build me a meat hall. His grin widened. The biggest one in the north. You might need a few more patrons to make that happen, and I'm not sure our town can support the biggest meat hall in the land, Gunnar said. Then I'll move to a bigger town, Ulf replied. Gunnar smiled faintly, rare thing on his face. Me, I just want the forge. Father's getting too old to swing the hammer, wants to pass it down. Blacksmithing's honest work, shaping the steel, the tools, the swords, everything a village needs. His fingers drummed on his knee, steady and thoughtful. Maybe no one remembers the blacksmith, but they remember the tools he made. Bjorn tipped his head. And if we don't come back? Ulf snorted again. If we don't make it back, then the Norns are even meaner than the Skald says. Bjorn laughed, but not too loud. It's always a dangerous thing to laugh at the weavers of fate. Gunnar added a serious tone. We all have vision, and that's what will keep us alive tomorrow. Without vision, there is no tomorrow. Now, stay with me until the end of this episode, and you'll walk away with more than just the clang of steel in your ears. You'll learn why the Viking axe was not simply a brutish tool, but a weapon of precision, designed for the hook, the pull, and the cleaving blow, crafted for speed and reach. And why the famed sword, romanticized by the sagas, was once a rare luxury, not a common man's weapon. You'll discover the humble shield, round-rimmed with iron, layered with lindenwood, a personal defense, yes, but also part of something greater, a shifting line of shields on the field, a promise that no man stands alone. You'll uncover how the Vikings wielded fire, not just as destruction, but as a weapon of the mind, burning supply lines, lighting enemy fields to force retreat, setting blaze under cover of night to shatter morale. 3 tactics, 1 truth. Fire, not merely flame, it was fear, chaos, and control. And when it's all told, you will see how these ancient methods echo into the strategies of today's battlefields and even into modern life. Because the Viking way was never just about war. It was about knowing your tools, knowing your enemy, and knowing when to strike with fire and when to shield and endure. By the end, you will not only understand the craft of Viking warfare, you will carry its lesson into your own battles, where they are fought with steel, with words, or with the quiet resolve of a heart set on victory. The sky was beginning to shift, the soft hint of pale light edging the black horizon. Gunnar's hand fell to his sword hilt. It's time. They stood together, the fire casting long shadows behind them. Around the camp, men began to rise, tightening belts, adjusting shields, murmuring soft prayers or dark jokes under their breath. Gunnar's voice rumbled low. Gather them. Bjorn called out, his voice lifting into the cold air, sharp and sure. Ulf walked the line of men, clapping shoulders, murmuring quiet encouragement. The army had taken shape, and the first breath of dawn touched the earth like a hesitant blessing. The men marched over the ridge toward the waiting enemy, towards the clash that would etch their names in history, towards the battle that would test not just their swords, but the weight of every dream they carried. Let us step now into the heart of Viking armory, not into the cultured chest of random blades, but into a world where every weapon tells a story. The Viking axe. It was no crude club, no mindless slab of iron for brute force alone. It was a weapon of artful design, crafted for precision, for cunning, for control. Look closely at its shape. The crescent blade, curved like the moon, thinning at the edge to bite deep, widening at the top to balance weight and force. It was light in the hand, allowing swift, repeated strikes. But behind the lightness was the true genius. The axe was not made just to swing, but it was also made to hook behind the shield rim, to pull down the guard of the enemy, to tear the defense away before the fatal cleaving blow. A single combat, a skilled axe fighter was not merely a wild slasher. He was a tactician. He used the axe to press, to control space, to shape the fight like a blacksmith shapes red-hot steel. And perhaps most importantly, the axe was the weapon of the common man. A farmer might use it to split wood by day and carry the same blade to war when it called. Axes were quick to forge, costing less iron, needing no elaborate pommel or guard. They were practical, durable, and they carried the rough, essential poetry of survival. Before you get a single image of an axe burned into your mind, consider 3 axes all used during the Viking Age. The bearded axe. This was the most iconic of the Viking axes, named for the long, hooked, lowered edge of the blade, like a beard trailing down from the axe head. The bearded axe was a marvel of versatility. Its design allowed the wielder to hook behind shields, pull weapons from enemy grasps, or catch an opponent's ankle or wrist in close quarters. The beard also reduced weight, keeping the axe light and fast while extending the cutting edge. It was perfect for slicing, sweeping, and precision strikes. It was not just a weapon, it was a tool of mastery, a clever balance of reach and control. And then there's the hand axe, the humble, one-handed axe. This was the axe of the common man. It was small, practical, and brutally effective. Carried on belts or tucked in at the waist, these axes were light, sometimes no bigger than a carpenter's tool, but in battle, they became swift, deadly companions. They were used for quick strikes, to punch through gaps in armor, to swing from horseback, or even to throw at short range. A Viking with a shield in one hand and a hand axe in the other was a nimble, dangerous fighter, moving between offense and defense in the blink of an eye. And then there's the Dane axe, the mighty Dane axe, sometimes called the two-handed war axe. It was fearsome, with a long shaft, often over 5, even 6 feet in length. With its wide, thin blade and massive reach, it was a weapon designed for sheer bone-breaking power, favored by elite warriors. The Dane axe could split shields, cleave through helmets, and shatter ranks with one sweeping arc. Its long shaft allowed a warrior to fight from behind the shield wall, reaching over the front lines to strike deadly blows where the enemy least expected. This was no lumbering giant's club. It was a finely balanced weapon, requiring skill, precision, and the strength to wield it without overextending. The sword in the Viking arsenal was something else entirely. The sword was rare. It was a luxury item, a work of beauty and craftsmanship, reserved for the wealthy and the powerful. Its iron was precious, its forging long, its balance and strength honed by smiths who poured months into each blade. In the early centuries of the Viking Age, few men carried swords. To own one was to display your status, to hold the gleam of nobility at your hip. The sagas sang of swords because they were exceptional. They were named and they were blessed, sometimes believed to carry their own spirits of fate. But for most, it was the axe. It was the axe that bore the weight of battle. Not crude, not mindless, but honed, shaped, perfected. The axe was the Viking's true companion, the edge that swung not only to destroy, but to command, to outthink, to win. And so as you picture the great Viking armies of old, do not fill your hands with the silver-hilted swords and royal banners. Instead, see the gleaming iron crescent, the sweep of the sharpened head of the axe, the working tool raised to warrior's glory. And remember, the humblest weapon in the right hands can become legendary. Another staple on the battlefield during the Viking Age was the Viking shield. Let me place it in your hands. Feel its weight. Not crushing, not cumbersome, but present, solid, real. Made not of iron, as you might first imagine, but of lindenwood, or sometimes alder or fir. It was light, flexible, chosen for its ability to absorb impact without splintering. The Viking shield was typically around 80 to 95 centimeters across, large enough to cover your shoulder to your thigh, but light enough to lift, to punch forward. At its center sat the iron boss, a dome, riveted piece of metal that covered your hand, allowing you to grip the shield's core without risking your knuckles to every blade or arrow. The rim, often edged in rawhide or thin bands of iron, reinforced to hold the shape of the shield, to keep it from splintering or fraying when the battle axes came swinging. But here's the magic. This was not just a slab of wood to cower behind. It was an extension of the fighter's body. In a shield wall, it was part of a breathing beast, each shield locking edge to edge, creating a living, moving fortress. And you can learn more about that in the episode on the Viking shield wall. Your shield protected the man beside you, and his shield protected you. It became a battering ram. You could punch it forward to shove an enemy off balance. Use the rim to crack the teeth of a man. Bash a man's head back long enough to swing your axe in close. It was versatile. It was used to deflect blows, to catch arrows, to press back a surge of attackers, or even to cover a wounded comrade long enough to pull him from the mud. And after the battle, you might laugh to see it, but a cracked shield laid flat on the ground, used as a makeshift table for bread, meat, and maybe a little mead. And then they were used as decoration to line the walls of the mead hall. The beauty of the shield wall was that it was replaceable. It wasn't an ornate heirloom. It didn't have jewels encrusted. It wasn't a relic. It was a tool, a weapon, a partner in survival. But make no mistake, it had its vulnerabilities. The Dane axe could shear right through it. A spear thrust to the right spot could go right through the center. Rain could soak the wood, and it might grow soft and heavy, slow to lift, easy to slip. Still, the shield was necessary. Every warrior, whether rich or poor, went into the battle with one. Because to stand without it was not bravery, it was a death sentence. So when you imagine holding this shield, don't think of it as just armor. Think of it as your third arm, as your silent companion, the thing between you and fate. The final weapon we discuss is the one where you feel the heat on your face, the way the air is too hot to breathe, and that feeling when you sense the untouchable raw power of fire. Fire was a weapon the Vikings knew how to wield, a living, breathing creature they unleashed upon their enemies. Fire was never just destruction, it was psychology, it was terror, it was a whisper in the night that grew into the screams by dawn. The Vikings used fire not with the blunt chaos of a wild blaze, but with the precision of a tactician. Imagine it now, their longships slipping quietly up a darkened river, creeping past sleeping villagers. Their warriors not charging yet, but scattering to light haystacks, barns, supply carts. The first flames flicker almost gently, an orange glow in the corner of their eye, a trickle of smoke curling into the night, but then it catches, it spreads, and it roars. And in the enemy camp, men wake not to swords at their throats, but to chaos, to the crackle of dry timber, the smell of burning grain, then the sudden, horrifying realization that their stores, their lifeline, their ash. The Vikings used fire when faced with wooden defenses. Vikings would use torches, flaming arrows, or burning carts to set structures, gates, walls, and supplies aflame. They didn't need to breach stone fortresses. Their real power was in making defenders panic, waste resources, and believe their own defenses were turning into a trap. The fire was also a diversion. A few good men would slip behind enemy lines, set fire to supply wagons, the camp, the rear ranks, and suddenly the enemy's attention was split. Half to the warriors at the front, half to the flames behind, threatening everything they needed to survive. And for this reason, fire became psychological warfare. Even without a direct attack, the mere threat of Viking fire was enough to bend the knee. Villages surrender because they knew what would happen to those who didn't. Rulers paid tribute not just because of the sword, but because they feared their fields and their homes would go up in smoke before a single blade was drawn. The genius of Viking fire was that it was alive, an ally that needed no rest, that moved with the wind, that fed on the enemy's own resources. And standing near it, you feel not just heat, but the terrifying realization that the ground beneath you, the roof above you, the food you stored, all of it can be turned against you. The Vikings understood this. They understood that war is not just muscle and steel, it's fear. And fear burns far faster than wood. Here are a few examples from the Viking Age. In 843, Viking longships sailed up a river in France. They hit a city on a church holiday when people were gathered to celebrate. The Vikings stormed in, set buildings on fire, and attacked everyone inside the church. But why burn the city? To break down defenses, to scare anyone hiding, and to send a warning to the other towns to surrender or burn. In the end, the Vikings took treasure, they took supplies, and they left the town in ashes. They also terrified every village nearby. In 845, the Vikings threatened Paris. They sailed 120 ships up the Seine River to attack Paris. The French king's army tried to stop them, but the Vikings won. The Vikings captured 111 men and hung them as human sacrifices, and the Vikings surrounded Paris, ready to burn it to the ground. But the French king, he paid a huge ransom, 7,000 pounds of silver, to make them leave. This shows just how the Vikings used the threat of fire to win. They didn't always need to burn a city. Sometimes they just needed the fear of it to work. In 867, a huge Viking army attacked and captured the English city of York. During the fight, they set parts of the city on fire to break through defenses and force their way in. Burning wasn't just random, it was a smart tactic to help them take a very important city. Now, let's step out of the museum and back onto the battlefield, where the tools became living forces and where our three warriors will use them in a fight they may not all survive. You see, fire wasn't just a tool in the hands of Viking leaders or armies. No, fire was more than that. It was more than destruction. It was strategy. It was fear. It was the invisible weapon that moved hearts and minds before swords ever crossed. Because just like Paris was threatened and York was set ablaze, so too does Bjorn. With a small band of men, he slips through the dark to the enemy's camp. And his purpose, to light the fires that will break not just the defense, but the spirit of the enemy. The Vikings advanced down the gentle slope, the dawn mist curling around their feet, the cold biting at their skin. They stopped just before the ground flattened, knowing full well what they were doing. To the left, the hill steepened sharply, tall grass and boulders exposed over time. It was a natural barrier. And to the right, a sandstone ridge loomed, half choked by trees, leaving only a narrow gap for passage. The enemy came running, loud, overconfident, but the Vikings, they locked shields, not in panic, not in haste, but like men who had measured the field, weighed the odds, and decided this was their ground. The shield wall held. They could feel it in the air, the press of wood against wood, the heavy thud of shields bracing together, then the ripple of men steadying their shoulders, ready to absorb the blow. Axes gleamed over the top of their heads, sharpened and ready. These were no clumsy tools. The Vikings swung them in arcs, and they hooked the enemy's shields away. They snapped spear shafts and drove them into the soft seams of the armor. The ground, once firm, softened underfoot as blood seeped into the soil, bodies piling where the enemy faltered, the uphill battle turning into a slaughter. But that was only half of the plan, because late last night, after the campfires died low and the men had finished boasting about dreams, about blacksmith shops and meat halls and fields full of children, Bjorn had taken a small band of men and crept into the shadows. Down towards the enemy camp they went, where only the women and wounded lay under sleeping tents. With tar, pitch, and pine resin, they worked fast, and when the battle roared in the distance, Bjorn's men set the camp ablaze. Flames leapt high, crackling, spitting sparks into the sky. Smoke billowed in dark, choking clouds. Screams rang out, not the screams of warriors, but the cries of women. This drew the attention of the commanders, forcing half of the enemy cavalry to break away, tearing back to the camp. And when that smoke was seen from behind the Viking shield wall, a horn blast split the air, and the Vikings surged forward. And now came the true violence. Axes bit deep, not blindly, but with practiced precision. They hooked enemies out of the line, dragged them forward into waiting blades, split helmets, split skulls, split hope. Shields weren't just defense. They punched forward like rams, bashing ribs, knocking men off their feet, cracking teeth when slammed downward onto the fallen foes. Arrows rattled harmlessly off the overlapping wall of the shield, but the spears thrust back through the gaps, finding flesh every time, and the line advanced and grinded, and it was unstoppable. It was a machine. Men seeing their friends fall, seeing the camp on fire behind them, they turned to run, but they found the path was blocked. The stone ridge on one side, the burning camp on the other, Bjorn's small force waiting at the choke point. It didn't take a shield wall to kill men running in panic. The Vikings showed no mercy, cutting down all who tried to flee. The final cavalry and the enemy commanders made their break, riding hard down the narrow path. Bjorn's men leapt to block the path, but the horses thundered forward. The first crashed through, knocking men aside like pins. The second burst through moments later, forcing others to scatter. Bjorn stood his ground. A rider charged straight for him. He waited, muscles coiled, and at the last heartbeat, he pivoted, and the axe slammed into the horse's upper leg, a precision blow, brutal, when the beast came crippling to the ground with thunder. And Bjorn's men rushed to finish the job. Bjorn looked on and failed to notice the final horse speeding past, and as the horse came by, the rider swept his sword across the back of Bjorn's neck. The cut was clean and deep. Bjorn dropped to his knees. His breath fled his chest. His axe slipped from his hands. The men ran to him, but it was too late. The gash was mortal. The last enemy rider vanished into the trees. The battle was done. Gunnar and Ulf came down the path, while the others stayed to strip valuables from the field. When they reached him, they knelt in silence beside their brother, their companion, their friend. No songs were sung. No boasts were made, only quiet. They lifted Bjorn's body, his head limp, his hands already cold, and they carried him back to camp. Ulf took his 2 hand axes, the ones that Bjorn had always carried, and the band of men walked home, their footsteps heavy, their hearts heavier. And that night, around the fire, they reminisced, and they spoke only of Bjorn. They told stories, they laughed, and they cried, and they honored their fallen comrade, because his name, his fight, his sacrifice, they were not meant to be hidden under the earth, but to be remembered by every man who raised a drink, and every boy who dreamed of joining the shield wall, of every woman who sang the old songs. And so they honored him. And the best way to honor a fallen comrade is to promise that when the next battle comes, that they would again lift their axes, brace their shields, and light the fires that would carry his name on forever and forward. When we peel back the raw iron in the fire of Viking warfare, we uncover something deeper, something that still echoes today, not just on modern battlefields, but in leadership, teamwork, and personal life. The Vikings didn't just win by brute force alone. They combined axes, shields, and fire with sharp psychological insight, tactical creativity, and precision, discipline, and teamwork. And remarkably, these same principles still shape how modern militaries and wise individuals operate. For the Vikings, fire wasn't always about burning the enemy's camp. It was about the threat of burning, the creeping panic of knowing your retreat was cut off, the fear that cracked the commander's nerves. Modern militaries call this information operations, or psyops, tactics that break an enemy's morale before the first shot is fired. The lesson here is clear. Sometimes you win not by overwhelming force, but by overwhelming fear. In life, this reminds us that how you present yourself matters. Whether in negotiation, a job interview, or facing personal challenges, people's perception of your strength often shapes the outcomes as much as your actual strength. The Viking shield wall offers another timeless lesson. It was a masterpiece of unity. No man stood for himself. Every shield protected the man beside him. It wasn't built on solo glory, but on mutual trust and discipline. Modern military squads still follow this principle, overlapping rules, covering fire, coordinated movements, and the unbreakable rule that no one is left behind. In your own life, this speaks to the power of community. Whether in your family, your workplace, your friendships, success doesn't come from standing apart. It comes from standing together. Ask yourself, who are you covering and who's covering you? The strongest people aren't lone wolves. They're those who know how to link shields. And then there's the tools of choice. Why did Vikings favor axes over swords? Because they were practical, affordable, and brutally effective. Swords were symbols, axes were survival. Even today, modern militaries prioritize flexibility, adaptable tools, lightweight drones, cyber strikes, precision tactics over simply building bigger, flashier weapons. This challenges us to focus on what actually works, not what merely looks impressive. You don't need the fanciest car, the biggest title, or the flashiest achievement to win your battles. You need the right tools, discipline, skill, and readiness to use what's already in your hands. So if this episode stirred something in you, if you're hungry for more stories, insights, and surprising lessons from Viking life and from the battlefield, then explore the rest of our episodes. The deeper truth about this episode isn't just about axes, shields, and fire. It's about how you fight. And are you strategic? Do you know when to strike and when to hold? Do you rely on your team, or are you trying to carry the weight alone? The Vikings remind us that true strength comes not from power, but from precision, from unity, and from courage. So the next time you face a challenge, remember, stand firm, link arms, use your tools wisely, and if needed, set the right fires to change the game. Today, we have journeyed through the clash of axes, the strength of shields, and the heat of fire. Not just as tools of Viking battle, but also as timeless strategies of survival, victory, and legacy. And I thank you for walking this path with me today. So if you've enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend. Leave a review. Help keep the sagas alive. And until next time, be bold, be strong, and awaken the Viking in you.